The sky turned purple on the day the aliens came to Earth. It was June 15, 2187, a day that would change human history forever. Dr. Kim Soo stood on the roof of Seoul National University, his eyes fixed on the massive ship that hung above the city like a metal cloud. At 45 years old, Kim was not easily impressed. As the head of the mathematics department, he had seen many amazing things in his life, but this was different. "It's really happening," said Lee Han, Kim's young assistant. His hand shook as he held up his phone to record the ship. Kim nodded and tightened his grip on the worn notebook he always carried. While everyone around him used tablets and neural links, Kim preferred paper and pen. His colleagues often laughed at this old habit, but Kim didn't care. There was something about writing by hand that helped him think better. 3 days later, the world learned that the visitors called themselves the Valaxians. They came from a star system 50 light-years away and were part of something called the Galactic Coalition, a group of 12 advanced alien species that worked together. Kim watched the news broadcast from his small apartment. The Valaxian spokesperson, a tall blue-skinned being named Luxor, spoke perfect English through a translation device. "We have observed Earth for many years," Luxor said. "Your species has potential, but the Galactic Coalition needs proof of your intelligence before we can welcome you." Kim sipped his tea and frowned. The idea that humans needed to prove themselves seemed unfair, but he understood. The universe was probably a dangerous place. Trust had to be earned. The next morning, Kim was surprised to receive a call from the Korean government. "Dr. Kim, we need you," said the science minister. "The aliens have asked for our best minds to take part in a series of tests. Your name is on our list." Kim almost said no. He liked his quiet life of teaching and research, but curiosity won out. "When do I leave?" he asked. 1 week later, Kim found himself at the newly built Space Diplomatic Center in Busan, meeting the other members of Earth's delegation. There were 15 of them from different countries, scientists, mathematicians, and engineers chosen to represent humanity. Park Ji, a quantum physicist from Daejeon, smiled at Kim as they shook hands. "I've read your papers on computational shortcuts. Very impressive." "Thank you," Kim said. He had noticed that everyone else carried advanced portable computers and neural aids. He only had his notebook and favorite pen in his jacket pocket. The Earth delegation was taken to a massive Valaxian transport ship. As they settled into their quarters, Kim looked out the viewport at Earth growing smaller below. He felt a mix of excitement and worry. That night, as the ship traveled faster than light toward the testing station, Kim couldn't sleep. He sat up and took out his notebook, sketching some equations by the dim light from the stars. A soft knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. It was Park Ji. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. Kim shook his head. "I keep thinking about what these tests might be," Park said. "The Valaxians seem so advanced. Their computational abilities must be incredible." Kim tapped his pen against his notebook. "Yes, but computation isn't everything." "What do you mean?" "Sometimes the shortest path to an answer isn't through raw calculation. Sometimes it's about seeing the pattern, finding the elegant solution." Park looked doubtful. "Maybe on Earth, but these aliens have technology beyond our imagination." Kim smiled. "Technology is just a tool. The real power is in how you think." As they talked, the ship emerged from faster-than-light travel. Through the viewport, they saw their destination, a massive ring-shaped station orbiting a dying star, the testing ground of the Galactic Coalition, the place where humanity would have to prove its worth. Kim put away his notebook and took a deep breath. Whatever challenges waited, he would face them his way, with pen and paper. The Earth delegation stepped off the Valaxian ship into a huge docking bay. Kim Soo had never seen a room so big. It could fit 10 football fields inside it. Ships from other worlds were parked nearby, each one stranger than the last. "Welcome to Testing Station Alpha," said a voice. The humans turned to see Chief Examiner Luxor walking toward them. Up close, His blue skin had a metallic shine. His eyes were large and completely black. He wore a simple gray suit that seemed to glow faintly. "Your quarters are ready," Luxor said. "Tomorrow, you will begin your orientation." As they followed Luxor through long hallways, Kim noticed how all the aliens they passed were using technology. Some had devices attached to their heads. Others spoke to invisible assistants in the air. Many had screens floating in front of their eyes. "The Coalition values computational efficiency above all," Luxor explained as they walked. "Your species is interesting, but quite primitive in your processing abilities." Park Ji frowned at this comment, but said nothing. Kim just patted the notebook in his pocket. Their rooms were small but comfortable. Each human had a private space with a bed, bathroom, and desk. On each desk sat a sleek black computer. "This is a human-compatible supercomputer," Luxor said. "It will help you during the tests. Without it, you would surely fail." After Luxor left, Kim sat on his bed and looked at the computer. He didn't touch it. Instead, he took out his notebook and began writing down his observations about the station. Later that day, a young Valaxian came to show them around. Her name was Nira, and she seemed friendlier than Luxor. "The testing station has been here for 500 years, Nira explained as she led them through a large garden area. "Plants from 100 worlds grew here. Many species have been tested. Some pass. Some fail." "What happens to those who fail?" asked Kim. "They are not allowed to join the coalition," Nira said. "They must wait 100 years before trying again." As they continued the tour, they entered a massive room filled with different alien groups. Some had tentacles. Others had multiple heads. All of them were using advanced devices. "These are the other candidates," Nira explained. "The Moxians are experts in quantum computing. The Drulair have biological computers in their bodies. The Haptors can think in 12 dimensions." Kim watched as a group of spider-like aliens worked together on a problem. Their legs moved quickly over control panels while their eyes glowed with data feeds. "And what do humans bring to this competition?" asked Nira, looking at Kim with genuine curiosity. Before Kim could answer, Park Ji stepped forward. "We may not have biological computers, but our adaptability is unmatched." Nira nodded politely, but Kim could tell she wasn't impressed. No one here would be impressed by humans. Not yet. That evening, the Earth delegation gathered in a common room to discuss strategy. "We need to use the supercomputers they gave us," said Jones, a physicist from America. "It's our only chance." Most of the others agreed, but Kim stayed quiet, drawing geometric shapes in his notebook. "What about you, Dr. Kim?" asked Park. "Will you use the computer?" Kim looked up. "I think I will stick with what works for me." The others exchanged worried looks. "That's suicide," said Jones. "You can't compete against their technology with pen and paper." Kim smiled slightly. Sometimes the simplest tool is the right one for the job. As the humans argued, an announcement came over the speakers. "All candidates report for preliminary testing at 800 hours tomorrow." Kim returned to his room and prepared for bed. He knew the others thought he was being stubborn or foolish. Maybe he was, but throughout his career, he had solved problems others couldn't because he approached them differently. Tomorrow would show if his way had any value among the stars. The testing hall was massive, with thousands of stations arranged in neat rows. Each station had a desk, a chair, and a computer terminal. Candidates from all species took their places. Humans were given a small section near the back. Kim Soo sat at his assigned spot and placed his notebook on the desk. All around him, aliens were connecting to their computers through various means. Some plugged cables directly into their bodies. Others wore headsets or special gloves. The human delegation was nervously setting up their provided supercomputers. Park Ji at the station next to Kim looked over with concern. "You really won't use the computer?" she whispered. Kim shook his head. "I'll be fine." A large screen at the front of the hall lit up with Luxor's face. Preliminary testing will assess your basic computational abilities, he announced. Results will be displayed on the main board. Begin. The first test appeared on all screens. It involved solving complex equations with many variables. Kim read the problem on his screen, then began writing in his notebook. His pen moved quickly across the paper. Around him, aliens were processing the problems at amazing speeds. Their computers hummed and flashed. Some of the candidates finished in seconds, their results instantly uploaded to the system. The human delegation struggled but managed to complete the problems using their supercomputers. They weren't fast, but they were doing okay. Kim worked steadily, solving each problem step by step. When he finished, he had to manually type his answers into the terminal. This made him much slower than everyone else. After the first hour, results appeared on the main board. Species were ranked by average completion time and accuracy. Humans were near the bottom, but not last. Kim's scores, however, were the worst among all humans. Dr. Kim is bringing down our average, Jones complained during a short break. He's making us look bad. I'll do better in the next round, Kim said calmly. The second test focused on pattern recognition across multiple dimensions. Again, the aliens processed the information through their advanced systems. Some species seemed specially designed for this kind of thinking. Kim stared at the patterns on his screen, then closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he began drawing in his notebook. His approach was completely different from the standard method. Luxor walked through the testing hall, observing the candidates. He stopped behind Kim and watched him work with pen and paper. Fascinating, Luxor said, but his tone was mocking. Like watching ancient history. I didn't realize humans still used such primitive tools. Several aliens nearby made sounds that might have been laughter. Kim ignored them and kept working. By the end of the day, the rankings were clear. The Moxians were in first place, followed closely by the Valaxians. Humans were third from the bottom. Kim was ranked last among all individual candidates. Back in their common room, the human delegation was discouraged. We're not doing as badly as I feared, said Dr. Zhang, a neurologist from China. But we're nowhere near the top. Maybe we can still improve, Park Ji said, trying to sound hopeful. Everyone looked at Kim, who sat quietly in the corner drawing something in his notebook. What about you? Jones asked angrily. Are you going to keep dragging us down? Kim looked up. The tests so far are designed for computational speed. That's not where humans excel. Then what are we good at? Jones demanded. Finding shortcuts, Kim said, seeing patterns others miss, making intuitive leaps. Park Ji moved closer to see what Kim was drawing. It looked like some kind of diagram with unusual symbols. What is that? She asked. Just some thoughts about tomorrow's tests, Kim said. As the others went to bed, Nira the young Valaxian appeared at the door. She approached Kim, curious about his notebook. May I? She asked, gesturing to his drawings. Kim nodded and showed her his work. Nira's eyes widened slightly. This approach is unexpected, she said, not how our systems would process the problem. That's the point, Kim replied with a small smile. For the first time since arriving at the station, someone was looking at him not with mockery, but with genuine interest. On the third day, Luxor announced a special challenge. Today's test will examine your ability to model complex systems, he said from the front of the hall. You will analyze the behavior of space-time in multiple dimensions. A collective murmur went through the testing hall. Even the most advanced species considered this a difficult task. This will separate the truly intelligent species from the rest, Luxor added, looking directly at the human section. The problem appeared on their screens. It showed a complex system where space-time curved and folded in ways that seemed impossible. The challenge was to predict how a particle would move through this system. The alien candidates immediately connected to their most powerful computational systems. Some species linked multiple minds together to increase their processing power. The testing hall hummed with the sound of advanced technology working at full capacity. The humans stared at their screens in shock. "This is beyond our supercomputers," Park G whispered. "We can't process this many variables." Most of the human delegation tried anyway, their fingers flying over keyboards as they attempted to set up the calculations. Their faces showed growing frustration. Kim studied the problem carefully. He flipped to a fresh page in his notebook and began drawing what looked like a simple diagram. Then he added equations beside it. Park G watched him with concern. "Kim, please, use the computer for this one. We have no chance otherwise." Kim shook his head. The computer would approach this the wrong way. "What do you mean?" Park asked. "It would try to calculate every possible path," Kim explained quietly. "But there's a pattern here." He continued working, his pen moving steadily across the paper. Hours passed. Many species had already submitted their solutions. The Valaxians finished in just 20 minutes, their advanced quantum processors easily handling the calculations. By the 4th hour, only a few candidates were still working. Kim was one of them. His notebook now had pages filled with equations and diagrams. Park G stayed at her station, watching him work even though she had already submitted her own incomplete solution. Luxor walked through the nearly empty hall and stopped at Kim's station. "Still drawing pictures, human?" he asked with clear amusement. Kim didn't look up. "Almost finished." Luxor made a sound like a snort. The most advanced Valaxian processing systems required millions of calculations for this problem. "Your primitive method is entertaining." Just then, Kim wrote down a final equation. He looked at it for a moment, then nodded to himself. He began entering his solution into the terminal. "You're seriously submitting that?" Luxor asked, peering at Kim's notebook. "Yes," Kim said simply. Luxor walked away, shaking his head. The deadline arrived. All solutions were locked in. The candidates gathered in a large viewing room where the results would be displayed. "The correct solution will be shown alongside each submission," Nira explained to the human delegation. "The closer your model is to the actual particle behavior, the higher your score." The main screen lit up. It showed the correct path of the particle, weaving through the complex space-time field in ways that seemed to defy physics. Then, one by one, each species solution was displayed alongside the correct path. Some were close, others were way off. The Valaxians' solution matched almost perfectly, earning them the top score so far. Finally, it was time for the human submissions. Most were incomplete or wildly inaccurate. Park G's attempt was respectable, but still far from correct. Then Kim's solution appeared on the screen. The room fell silent. His model matched the particle's path perfectly, not almost perfectly, but exactly. Every twist and turn, every dimensional shift was precisely predicted. Luxor stared at the screen in disbelief. "This is impossible," he said. Park G turned to Kim with wide eyes. "How did you do it?" Kim smiled slightly. "I found a shortcut." For the first time since arriving at the testing station, the humans weren't at the bottom of the rankings. Kim Soo was at the very top. News of Kim's perfect solution spread quickly through the testing station. Aliens from all species came to look at the human who had solved the impossible problem with just pen and paper. The human delegation celebrated in their common room. Even Jones, who had been most critical of Kim, was now patting him on the back. "How did you do it?" Park G asked. Everyone gathered around to hear his answer. Kim opened his notebook. The problem looked complex, but it had a hidden pattern. "Look here." He pointed to a simple diagram he had drawn. The particle's path wasn't random. It followed a fundamental law. But the Valaxian computers didn't find this pattern, Dr. Jung said. "Because they were calculating every possible path," Kim explained. "They were doing too much work. Sometimes the answer is simpler than the problem looks." Their celebration was interrupted when Luxor entered the room with 4 other Valaxian officials. His black eyes were cold. "Dr. Kim Soo," Luxor said, "you will come with us for questioning." The room went quiet. Kim closed his notebook and stood up. "What's this about?" Park Ji asked, stepping forward. "We believe there was cheating," Luxor said. "No human could solve that problem with such primitive methods." Kim followed the Valaxians to a small room with a single table and 2 chairs. For 3 hours, they questioned him about his solution. They asked how he had communicated with others, how he had hacked into their system, how he had stolen the answer. Kim answered every question calmly. "I simply solved the problem," he said again and again. They made him work through the solution step by step, explaining each part of his thinking. At first, they looked for mistakes or gaps in his knowledge. By the end, some of them were taking notes. Meanwhile, Park Ji went looking for Nira. She found the young Valaxian in one of the science labs. "They think Kim cheated," Park said. "You saw his work. You know he didn't." Nira looked troubled. "Chief Examiner Luxor is not used to being wrong, especially about less advanced species. But surely truth matters in your coalition," Park said. Nira was quiet for a moment. "Let me see what I can do." Later that evening, Kim returned to the human quarters. He looked tired but calm. "What happened?" Park asked. "They made me solve 3 more problems while they watched," Kim said. "I think I convinced them I didn't cheat." The next morning, all candidates gathered in the main hall. Luxor stood at the front, looking stiff and formal. "Yesterday's results have been verified," he announced. "The human candidate Kim Su's solution was correct and achieved through legitimate means." A murmur went through the crowd. Some alien species seemed impressed. Others looked concerned. Furthermore, Luxor continued, "The method used by candidate Kim revealed a more efficient approach to the problem. Coalition scientists are now studying this method." This caused an even bigger stir. Kim noticed some Valaxians in the back of the room studying copies of his solution. "The rankings have been updated," Luxor finished. "Testing will continue tomorrow." As the crowd broke up, Nira approached Kim. "Your solution is causing quite a debate among our scientists," she said. "Some are saying it's just luck. Others think it shows a different kind of intelligence. What do you think?" Kim asked. "I think it's interesting," Nira said. "Our entire approach to computation is based on processing power, doing calculations faster and with more data. You did something different." As they talked, Park Ji noticed Luxor watching them from across the room. He didn't look happy. That night, as Kim prepared for bed, he found a message on his terminal. It read, "Tomorrow's challenge will prove that true intelligence requires computational power. Prepare to fail, human." The message wasn't signed, but Kim knew who sent it. Luxor wasn't ready to accept that a human with pen and paper could be as smart as a Valaxian with a supercomputer. Kim smiled slightly. He opened his notebook to a fresh page and began making notes for tomorrow. The next morning, all candidates were called to a special announcement. The main hall was packed with aliens from every species. Kim and the human delegation stood near the back. Luxor stepped onto the raised platform at the front. "Today we present the ultimate challenge," he said. His voice echoed through the hall. "This will truly separate the intelligent from the primitive." A large screen behind him lit up, showing a swirling mass of energy. "This is a live feed of the neutron star our station orbits," Luxor explained. "Inside its field, we have placed quantum-entangled particles." The screen zoomed in to show tiny dots of light moving through the energy field. "Your task is to predict the exact path of these particles as they move through the collapsing field," Luxor continued. "This requires tracking trillions of variables in real time. It is the most complex problem in our testing system." Park Ji looked worried. "That's impossible without massive computing power," she whispered to Kim. "Each species will choose one representative," Luxor announced. "You may use your most advanced computational systems." The alien groups immediately began discussing who to send. The Moxians selected their highest-ranked computer expert, The Drillere chose 3 of their members who would link their biological computers together. The human delegation huddled together. "We have no chance," Jones said. "Even our supercomputers can't handle this many variables." "We should still try," Dr. Zhang said. "Perhaps Park Ji. She has the most experience with quantum physics." All eyes turned to Kim. He had been silent, watching the screen with the neutron star. "What do you think, Dr. Kim?" Park asked. "You solved the last problem, but this is different. This is real-time prediction with changing variables." Kim nodded slowly. "I'll do it." "With the computer?" Jones asked hopefully. "No," Kim said. "With this." He patted his notebook. The others began to protest, but Kim held up his hand. "Trust me. I see something in the field pattern." The representatives from each species took their places in a special testing arena. Each had a station with advanced computers and data feeds. The Valaxians provided extra processing units for those who wanted them. When Kim walked in with only his notebook and pen, the alien representatives stared. Some made sounds that might have been laughter. Luxor approached Kim's station. "This is not a simple equation, human. This is real-time prediction of quantum behavior in a collapsing field. You need computational power." Kim simply took his seat. "I'll manage." Luxor shook his head and walked away. Nira, who was helping set up the monitoring systems, passed by Kim's station. "Good luck," she said quietly. "I hope you see whatever pattern you're looking for." The challenge began. The quantum field on the screen began to shift and change. Particles moved in seemingly random directions as the neutron star's field fluctuated. The alien representatives were immediately absorbed in their work. Their computers processed massive amounts of data. Some aliens were so connected to their systems that their eyes glowed with data streams. Kim watched the screen carefully. He made a few notes, but mostly just observed. Park Ji and the other humans watched nervously from the viewing area. "He's not doing anything," Jones said. "This is embarrassing." "Give him time," Park said, but she looked worried too. An hour passed. The quantum field grew more chaotic. Some aliens were struggling to keep up with the changing variables. Their predictions started to fall behind the actual movements. Kim continued to watch and take occasional notes. Then, halfway through the allowed time, he began writing rapidly in his notebook. Page after page filled with equations and diagrams. The alien audience was now watching Kim with curiosity. Here was this primitive human, using paper and pen, while everyone else used the most advanced technology in the galaxy. Was he crazy, or did he see something they didn't? As the challenge continued, the quantum field became even more chaotic. The particles moved faster and more unpredictably. On the big screen, their paths looked like wild, tangled lines of light. The alien representatives were struggling. Their computers worked harder, making high-pitched sounds. Some of the aliens had to disconnect from their systems to avoid overload. "The field is becoming too complex," Nira explained to the human delegation in the viewing area. "Even our most advanced systems are having trouble tracking all the variables." Park Ji watched Kim with growing worry. He was still writing in his notebook, page after page of equations, but he hadn't entered anything into the system yet. "What is he doing?" Jones asked. "Time is running out." On the testing floor, Kim worked steadily. As he wrote, a pattern began to form in his mind. The particles weren't moving randomly. There was a rule behind their movement, a simple rule hidden under layers of complexity. Luxor walked around the testing arena, checking on each representative. He stopped behind Kim and looked over his shoulder. "Still drawing pictures, human?" Luxor asked. Kim didn't look up. "I'm almost there." Luxor glanced at Kim's notebook. The pages were filled with equations and diagrams that looked nothing like the standard quantum models. "This is not how quantum physics works," he said. "Not how you think it works," Kim replied quietly. Luxor walked away, shaking his head. The next hour was tense. More alien representatives gave up as their systems failed to keep up with the changing field. Only the Valaxians and Moxians were still making predictions, and even their accuracy was dropping. Kim finally stopped writing. He looked at what he had created, a single, elegant equation that took up less than half a page. It was beautiful in its simplicity. He stood up and approached Nira, who was monitoring the systems. "I need to input my solution," he said. Nira looked surprised. "You have a prediction model for the entire field?" "Yes," Kim said, "but I need to input it differently, not as a standard prediction algorithm." Nira hesitated, then led him to the main control panel. "What do you need? Can your system handle a custom equation?" Kim asked. "Yes, but..." Nira looked unsure. "The standard approach is to calculate each particle's position separately." "I'm not taking the standard approach," Kim said. Luxor noticed them at the control panel and walked over quickly. "What is happening here?" "Dr. Kim has a solution," Nira said. "A complete solution." Luxor looked shocked. "Impossible." Kim showed his notebook to Nira. "Can you input this exactly as I've written it?" Nira studied the equation. Her eyes widened. I don't recognize this approach." "It will work," Kim said confidently. Luxor looked at the equation and made a dismissive sound. "This is far too simple to model the quantum field. It's missing thousands of variables." "Sometimes the universe is simpler than we think," Kim said. After a moment of hesitation, Luxor nodded to Nira. "Let him try. Let everyone see that complex problems require complex computation." Nira carefully entered Kim's equation into the system. The computer processed it for a moment. Then new lines appeared on the main screen, predictions based on Kim's equation. Everyone in the testing arena stopped to watch. The human delegation held their breath. At first, the prediction lines seemed to be way off from the actual particle movements. But then, as the field shifted again, something amazing happened. The particles began to follow Kim's predicted paths perfectly. "It's working," Park Ji whispered. As the quantum field changed and twisted, Kim's simple equation continued to predict the particles' movements with perfect accuracy. Where the alien computers had failed to keep up, Kim's solution adapted effortlessly. Luxor stared at the screen in disbelief. "How is this possible?" Kim stood quietly, watching his prediction model work. In his hand, he held his simple notebook and pen, the only tools he had needed to solve what the aliens considered impossible. Complete silence filled the testing arena. All eyes were fixed on the main screen where Kim's prediction model continued to track the particles with perfect accuracy. Even as the quantum field twisted into new patterns, his equation adjusted flawlessly. The Valaxian representative disconnected from his computer system. The Moxian team stopped their calculations. One by one, all the alien competitors turned to look at the human with the notebook. Luxor approached Kim slowly. His usual confidence was gone. "How?" he asked simply. Kim opened his notebook to show his work. The particles looked random, but they weren't. They followed a basic pattern that repeats at different scales. "But our systems analyzed every possible variable," Luxor said. "We calculated trillions of interactions per second." "That's the problem," Kim said. "You were calculating too much. You couldn't see the forest because you were looking at every tree, every leaf, every cell." Park Ji and the human delegation had rushed down to the testing floor. They gathered around Kim as he explained his solution. "Think of it like weather," Kim said. "You can try to track every water droplet in a storm, or you can look for the larger pattern. The universe often works on simple rules that create complex results." Nira stepped forward. "May I?" she asked, reaching for Kim's notebook. Kim handed it to her. She studied his equations carefully. "This approach, it's completely different from our standard models. You didn't track each particle. You found the underlying rule that governs all of them." "Exactly," Kim said. "I wasn't trying to predict each movement. I was looking for the pattern behind all movements." The Moxian representative, a tall blue alien with 6 eyes, joined them. But how did you see this pattern without computational analysis? Kim smiled. Humans are good at pattern recognition. We evolved to see connections. A tiger hiding in tall grass, a face in a crowd, a rhythm in chaos. But this was quantum physics, Luxor said, still not fully accepting. The most complex field in science. Complex doesn't always mean complicated, Kim replied. Sometimes complex things follow simple rules, like how simple math creates a beautiful seashell shape, or how 3 simple laws of motion explain planets moving around stars. As Kim spoke, aliens from various species gathered to listen. For the first time, they weren't looking at humans as primitive or backward. They were looking with new interest, even respect. One of the coalition leaders, an elder Valaxian, approached the group. The challenge is complete, she announced. The human representative has provided the most accurate solution. The human delegation cheered. Park Ji hugged Kim, who looked embarrassed but pleased. There will be a formal ceremony tomorrow, the elder continued. For now, all representatives may rest. As the crowd broke up, Nira handed Kim's notebook back to him. This will change how we think about computational problems, she said. Your approach, it's elegant. Kim nodded in thanks. He noticed Luxor standing alone, looking at the main screen where Kim's equations still perfectly tracked the quantum particles. Kim walked over to him. Complex problems don't always need complex solutions, he said gently. Luxor turned to him. For 10,000 years, the Valaxians have believed that intelligence equals computational power. We built bigger computers, faster processors. We modify our own brains to calculate better. He looked down at Kim's notebook. And yet, with just paper and pen. Different doesn't mean worse or better, Kim said. Just different. For the first time, Luxor seemed to truly consider this idea. Perhaps, he said slowly, there is something to learn from human thinking after all. As Kim walked back to join the human delegation, he felt a sense of quiet pride. He hadn't just solved a problem. He had shown that humanity had something valuable to offer the galaxy, a different way of seeing the universe. Not better, not worse, just uniquely human. The grand hall of the testing station was filled with representatives from every species in the Galactic Coalition. Today was a special day. Earth would officially join as the 13th member of the coalition. Kim Soo stood with the human delegation at the front of the hall. He wore a simple blue suit and carried his worn notebook in his pocket. Next to him, Park Ji smiled proudly. The Elder Council of the Coalition, made up of the oldest and wisest members of each species, entered the hall. They took their places on the raised platform. The head of the council, an ancient Valaxian with silver skin, stepped forward. Today, we welcome a new species to our coalition, she announced. The humans of Earth have proven their worth through the tests. But more importantly, they have shown us something new. The elder looked directly at Kim. For thousands of years, we believed that advanced intelligence required advanced computation. We built faster computers. We created more complex algorithms. We thought this was the only path forward. She gestured for Kim to join her on the platform. Feeling nervous, he walked up and stood beside her. This human, with simple tools from his world, solved problems our most advanced systems could not. The elder continued. Not because he calculated faster, but because he saw what we missed, the patterns beneath the complexity. Kim looked out at the crowd. He saw Luxor standing with the other Valaxians. The chief examiner no longer looked arrogant. Instead, he seemed thoughtful. The coalition has always valued diversity of life forms, the elder said. Now we understand that we must also value diversity of thinking. Different minds see different solutions. She turned to Kim. Dr. Kim Soo, in recognition of your contributions, the coalition invites you to help establish a new research institute. This institute will study the bridge between computational thinking and intuitive thinking. Kim was surprised. I would be honored, he said. Nira stepped forward from the crowd. I volunteered to work with Dr. Kim on this project, she said. The elder nodded. Approved. The Kim Nira Institute will begin work immediately. After the ceremony, there was a celebration. Aliens and humans mingled together, sharing food and stories. Kim found himself surrounded by scientists from different species, all wanting to learn about his approach to problem-solving. Park Ji found Kim hiding in a quiet corner, writing in his notebook. "Still working?" she asked with a smile. Kim showed her his notes. "I have some ideas for the new institute, ways to combine human intuition with alien computation." "You've changed how they see us," Park said. "When we arrived, they thought we were primitive." "We are primitive, in some ways," Kim said. "We don't have their technology or their computational power. But that's not the whole story of intelligence." Luxor approached them. He seemed different now, less rigid, more curious. "Dr. Kim," he said, "I have been studying your methods. I believe there is much we can learn from each other." "I agree," Kim said. "I was wrong about humans," Luxor admitted. "I measured intelligence by only one standard, computational efficiency. I failed to see other forms of problem-solving." "That's the beautiful thing about the universe," Kim said. "There are always new ways to understand it." As the celebration continued, Kim looked out a window at the stars. Soon, human ships would travel to those stars, making contact with new worlds and species. Earth was now part of something much bigger. But humans would not simply copy alien ways. They would bring something unique to the galaxy: the human perspective. Not better or worse than alien thinking, but different. Special. Kim thought about his old classroom back on Earth. He had always told his students that mathematics was about seeing patterns that others missed. Now he would teach that same lesson to the stars. He opened his notebook to a fresh page and began to write. The universe was vast and full of wonders, and there was so much more to discover with pen, paper, and the human mind.